You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
This podcast is presented by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, telling Oklahoma stories through its people since 1927. Follow them online at oklahomahof.com and definitely on Instagram at oklahomahof. Let's get into today's episode. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode down at the Oklahoma Hall of Fame Today's Friday. It probably isn't going to be Friday when you're listening to this, but it's a beautiful day. The sun is shining and it's not cold, so we haven't had our second or third false spring yet, which we usually get in Oklahoma. But my guest today is an Oklahoma Hall of Famer who was inducted in 2006, and that is Mr. Bob Burke. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Mike. Thank you very much. Yeah.
For some context for people listening, who are you, what do you do, and why do you do it?
Okay. I am an attorney. Mm-hmm. I'm an author. I'm a historian.
Yeah.
And I used to be, before I got too old to do it, a gardener.
A gardener? Okay.
And
I'm terrible at all of those, I think.
No. I loved working in the yard as long as I could.
Yeah.
But I was born 1948 in Broken Bow, a little town in McCurtain County in southeast Oklahoma.
Yeah.
We didn't have a lot of money, but we never got hungry because we always had a wonderful, wonderful garden.
Yeah.
I'm an only child. My father drove a propane tank until he decided to get into politics, and he was elected county commissioner for the northern part of McCurtain County and served there for about 40 years.
Wow.
My mom was a stay-at-home mom until I was about the 6th or 7th grade, and she established what became a very successful insurance agency. Mm-hmm. So I grew up. Nobody in my entire extended family on either side, large families, nobody had ever gone to college, but they insisted that I go to school.
Yeah.
So I went to Broken Bow High. Broken Bow, we didn't have, it's before kindergarten was invented, I think. And so I started first grade in Broken Bow and graduated from Broken Bow High School. Mm-hmm. It was one of those, we only had about 600 people from 7th grade to 12th grade. And I honestly think that I knew every one of those 600 people for various reasons. I didn't go to class a lot, especially my senior year. But what I did is about age 15, I was invited to work at the radio station in Idabel. KBEL was the only radio station in the county. And so I was hired originally just to do, at age 15, my mom, in fact, till I became 16, had to drive me from Broken Bow to Idabel to work. And I did a disc jockey show from 7 till 10 when the station signed off, called the Teenage Rendezvous. Yeah. Okay. Now, the owner of the station had heard somewhere that one of the Beatles had said that they were as popular as Jesus. Okay, big controversy at the time. And so he wouldn't buy any Beatles records. So I bought them on my own. And so the transmitter room to the radio station was just behind the control room. Mm-hmm. And then the owner and his wife lived about 100 yards. And so I'd go on the air at 7, their lights are still on, but about 8:15 or 8:30 they went to bed. And so, now this is the only radio station in the county, so all the teenagers, I have friends in Oklahoma City now, a former judge, who they listened to the Teenage Rendezvous. Yeah. And so I played the Beatles, but I had to play my own record, and I played it after the owners went to bed. So I worked in the radio station. Yeah. I didn't go to class a lot, especially my senior year, because even though I started out working just a few hours a week, my junior and senior year, the guy who opened up the station, it was a daytimer that was on the air from 5:30 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. Yeah. And so he opened up in the morning, and he and another guy leaves for, he's there most of the day. Well, he got terribly ill when it came to my junior year in high school. And so they thought he was going to come back. He never did. He just was ill for years until he died. So there wasn't anybody but me, because the third guy got a job in Dallas. So then half of my junior year and all of my senior year, that's why I get up early now. I got up about 4:30. By this time, I drove to the radio station, turned on the computer, and went on the air at 5:30. And I did what was called rip and read in broadcasting. It's where we had an Associated Press machine that literally typed off the news, okay? And so I would rip it off, and they would prepare a 15-minute newscast of everything going on in the world. Well, we were in the Vietnam War at the time, and I shall never forget, every time you came across in a story of one of those long Vietnamese commanders, General so-and-so, well, you just went, and General Moichan, you just kind of stumbled through it.
Yeah.
But it's called rip and read. And so I learned early to look at a word and, don't stumble on it. No reason to read over it. Wasn't time.
Yeah.
And then after that, I did about a 10-minute farm report, okay? Because they had a farm report. I just simply had to read it. And then I was on the air until 11 o'clock in the morning. Did a big local newscast with all the people who had died and stuff at 11 o'clock, true local radio. But I left at 11, went back and went to 2 classes, class and a half really, and then went back on the air at 1 o'clock and was on the air until 10 o'clock when I turned off the computer. But I enjoyed it, and I made $1.25 an hour. And Mike, I thought, if I can ever make $100 a week, I can have anything in life. Really, I did. Well,
Yeah.
But I enjoyed that broadcasting, and it gave me a great leg up in the world of broadcasting, because I came to the journalism school at OU, and there were people wanting to be broadcasters. I was a veteran of 3 years. So I came up, and I had taken a correspondence course to get what's called a first-class license with the Federal Communications Commission. And you had to have one to sign on the transmitter log of a station like KOMA here in the city. KOMA was perhaps the strongest station in the nation. It was 50,000 watts, which is as high as you could go. It was on at 1520, and it had a directional antenna that literally was pointed toward Portland, Oregon. So, and rock and roll, what was called 2020 radio, of where you had a news at 20 till, news at 2020, And the owner of KOMA owned 6 other stations in Kansas, WHB in Kansas City, station in New Orleans, station in St. Louis, and was one of the pioneers of this new format. And the kids throughout the western half of the country listened to KOMA. We had advertising to, it might say, and I used to get $50 for each of these sock hops that I was going to attend. Never attended one, but so it would say, Saturday night in Longview, Kansas, Bob Burke will appear with Squatty and the Bodies, with those bands, because bands would advertise with us because at night we had an incredible strong signal throughout 29 states. For example, in the states of Wyoming and Montana, in 2/3 of those states, KOMA was the only station you could hear at night. We were number 1 in Denver. We were number 1 in Albuquerque and places like Cheyenne, Wyoming. We were number 3 in San Francisco at night because we had this new style of music. Now, we lost a lot of disc jockeys all the time who weren't going to school like me because then I started, I did the all-night show for a while. We had house names in those days. You might have 2 or 3 people who were Gary Mack, our nighttime deal was Robert W. Morgan. So for several months, I was Robert W. Morgan. Then I started doing the 7 to midnight, and it was the Babbling Bob Burke show, which aptly described me. Okay.
Yeah.
But at night, that strong signal at night, it was, especially from 10 to midnight, that was 11, or that was 9, well, the 2 hours difference in the mountain time zone, but it was still just 8 to 10 o'clock on the West Coast. Yeah. So with that signal booming in, a directional signal that was booming in, we would trade places almost every month with WABC in New York, with who had the most listeners in America. So it was really cool, really cool. But so I enjoyed that because I was just a kid. Oh, man, I was just absolutely a kid. And it worked well for me because I think the statute of limitations has probably run on this. But I would dedicate songs to my professors at OU. I didn't have a lot of time to go to class. Should have been an honorary degree, okay? But but I would dedicate songs to them. And on early Sunday mornings, we had a program that at one time had been the OSU hour. I changed it to the OU hour. It's where I interviewed. So I did interview one of my professors to talk about the history of music, because I had to take that deal, you know. And I really didn't know a lot about that class that summer, but I always had lots of free passes that I would pass out, and the professors would love to pass those out in their classes, because that's when the first McDonald's in Oklahoma City was built, and we had just stacks, you know, and that's before we had numbers like, you know, 521 whatever, 794 was but it was Swift, the Swift exchange. So say the third caller at Swift 4444, get a McDonald's hamburger, fries, and a milkshake. Well, I lived off of that. I was single, and I lived off that for a while. But it was very important. And movie passes, because you had the Winchester Drive-In Theater, still on the south side. I was there at the opening of it, okay, in about 1969 or 70. Yeah. And we had a lot of passes to it. So that really helped in my classes, okay? Yeah. And, especially one, because I interviewed the lady who was teaching an English literature class. Well, I really didn't have the time to read like all 10 novels that we were doing. And so, but I interviewed her, and it was just I think I interviewed her on Dickens. Yeah. And so it was really great. So it comes time for the final, and you know, I didn't know any of these characters. So I just said things like, well, he was so important as the character because he expressed humility and whatever. And I did good in that class, really did. So yeah. I as a disc jockey, I also, back in high school, had been directed to a career in broadcasting because the week before I went out for football, my sophomore year, and the week before before the first game, Mike Gregory and Glennie Haley creamed my leg. They crushed I was about a third string guard, okay, wasn't very good. And so my coach was a guy named John Axton. Now, John's son was Hoyt Axton, the great singer and entertainer from Oklahoma. And his wife, who was my English teacher, was Mae Boren Axton, who wrote Elvis's first song, Heartbreak Hotel. And John had originally been from Idabel. Yeah. So Coach Axton he's a great coach, very successful, but he was, how do you say this? He was very rough around the edges. So I got in the locker room and I'm limping in there, and he said, "Bobby, you're not very good anyway, and you're going to really mess that knee up. I'd just quit if I were you." So I did. Yeah. Well, so I'm working at the radio station anyway. And so come Friday night, and by the way, my mother, for religious reasons, was very strict. And I had never been, even though I was president of the student council, I was assembly president, had an office above the auditorium that was larger than the superintendent's office that had been built for me I really ran the school. And the superintendent said that. Yeah. I ran the school the last senior year and junior year. But my mother had not allowed me to go to football games. Okay. So On the Thursday before the first football game of the season, Stan Kaysen, who had always been had broadcast the football games, said, well, no, he just quit, went to Dallas, okay? And so Mr. Stanley, who owned the station, says, Bobby, you're the only one left. I said, well, you know, I've never done this. He said, well, I don't know anything about sports. So this is a unique thing of how that perhaps I always had the ability to think on my feet and to just wing it.
Yeah.
The first time I was ever in that football stadium, I broadcasted on radio. And
awesome.
Did that for the last 3 years of high school.
Yeah.
So I'm a seasoned sportscaster by the time I come up.
Right.
And Harold Keith, in addition to working at KOMA, I was always, hey, there's 24 hours in the day. Mm-hmm. I never was happy with just one job. I wanted to be involved. So Harold Keith was a legendary sports information director at OU. Yeah. And he hired me for $20 a game to be the public address announcer at the old field house, which is now the McCaslin Field House on the OU campus. And hey, I had never seen, now basketball I knew. Because I had been the PA announcer at at our high school basketball games, okay? Yeah. And I announced anything we ever had. Graduation, even my own graduation, I was the announcer of it, okay? So I didn't know, I'd never seen a wrestling match. We didn't have wrestling. Yeah. And OU was big. They were winning national championships. I had gymnastics. I didn't even know what that was. I was a kid from Broken Bow. So here's what I did. I talked to the coaches of both of those, the wrestling coach and they linked me with a player on their team, either a wrestler or a gymnastics star who was injured. And I said, okay, I need for you to you got to teach me all about this sport. So I learned enough of where I could do the public address, you know. Now this is, I don't even remember the terminology. So worked out. I did that for, probably 9 months or so. And then a great guy named Bob Burke that later I noticed right here somewhere is I wrote his Michael Dean and I wrote his biography. Yeah. He was like a second father to me because he had just 5 years before and had become the play-by-play announcer for OU for football and for basketball. He ultimately would be the play-by-play announcer either for OU or OSU for 50 years. Wow. Broadcast more college sports activities than anyone in history. So anyway, Bob knows me from being the PA announcer. And so he decided he needed a color commentator on the OU Sports Network, the basketball network. He was going to pay me $25 a game. So, man, I got, what is that? That's 25% increase, you know. Now, I was making okay money at KOMA. Yeah. Well, it was okay money for me to have I had a room in the top of this old lady's house on Lahoma, you know, and $20 a month or something, you know. Yeah. It was really great. Housing was cheap, and I'm really 112 years old. It really is why I tell stories like that. I forgot to tell you that when I was born, I wasn't born in a hospital. We didn't have one in Broken Bow. I was born in the front room of our little 2-room house. Yeah. In fact, Dr. Cheryl delivered me. In fact, mother had kind of gone into labor like at midnight. So Dad puts a cot in front of her bed. He sleeps the rest of the night there, and I'm born about 10 o'clock in the morning, okay? Yeah. And so, hey, I was, you know, I don't meet a lot of people who were born in a house. Right. Yeah. And here's what's cool. This really makes me sound old. Is that he had delivered my mother. He had delivered my mother 25 years before in this little town of Hochatown, that is now covered up by Broken Bow Lake, where both my parents were born and where all my grandparents lived. And my grandfather each time for her birth 25 years before and mine in 1948, he paid Dr. Sherrill with a calf. They're really true. I don't even know anybody, But that's just, we were poor down there.
Yeah.
We often say that I was so poor and we lived so far out in the country that you had to go back toward town to hunt. Okay. It's not exactly true, but it really goes well.
I mean, Broken Bow is way out there. Mm-hmm. It's a lot different now.
Oh, in fact, the Hall of Fame has recently published a book, and I'm so proud of it. Got a picture of my parents in it, and it's a history of Ho Chi Town, Beavers Bend State Park, and Broken Bow Lake.
Yeah.
And I've lived that history. In fact, the photo on the front was chosen, well, I helped choose it, because that's the stretch of the mountain fork where I learned to swim. Okay. Yeah. The lieutenant governor wrote the foreword to that, but that is there are 3,000 cabins. In fact, so neat, Verbo, about 6 months ago, listed their top 10 destinations for Americans looking for some place to stay. Number 1 was St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. Number 2 was Broken Bow, Oklahoma. Yeah. Number 3 was Disney World, and number 4 was Yellowstone National Park.
Isn't that crazy?
My dad is rolling over in his grave because that was just worthless, rocky land up there.
It's a gold mine now.
No. 35 years ago, we could have bought that whole north end of the county for $200 an acre.
Yeah.
Now there are $2 million cabins there. Yeah. But it's just... Now, they have traffic problems that hopefully the Department of Transportation will be taking care of, but that blows anybody's mind because I think the book was aptly called Explosion of Prosperity.
Yeah.
So it's amazing.
I've been down there, and you're right. The infrastructure needs to be revamped.
Yeah,
right?
and the Highway Department recently allocated like $54 million to like 4-lane the highway from Ho Chi Town, or from the new Ho Chi Town to Broken Bow. And that town means so much to me because out on the highway there's a little white church. Mm-hmm. And that's the old church that was in Ho Chi Town, where my parents were married in 1946.
Yeah.
And then my mother was hired. She was an insurance agent by the late 60s when they moved. My grandparents, Kincaid, were the last ones, good Scottish name, had moved. They were the last ones to leave Ho Chi Town before the water started forming.
Yeah.
And but they hired my mother to supervise the moving of the cemetery. And there's a huge cemetery there. I have kinfolks there for 150 years, So anyway, I thought, and I won't ever write my autobiography, but I thought if I did, I would begin with this sentence. There are 2 things over which humans have no control. Now, because, we have some control by choices or whatever for most everything we do. I screw up a lot, but it's my choice usually. But I wanted to say there are 2 things over which humans have no control. Where you are born and who your parents are. You have no choice in that. Mm-hmm. And then I would say I would change neither. Because I enjoyed growing up in a small town. If I got a whipping at school, because, hey, I started getting paddlings in the 5th grade. I know this would surprise you, but it was for talking too much, okay? In the 5th grade, Mrs. Barnett, Carrie Burnett, would wear me out with a paddle, okay? And but it's small town. Yeah. By the time I got home, Mom already knew it because Miss Burnett called her. And when in the 6th grade I got a few paddlings, I guess the last paddling I got was in a physics class. Howard Miner was a assistant football coach, big old boy, big old boy. And so I was talking to after Mae Axton had gone back to Nashville, he took over English. Mm-hmm. And so I was talking too much, and so he got me out in the hallway. And I'll never forget those 3 licks with that big paddle. Because I'm telling you, he knocked me down the hallway all the way to the office. It was, it's the last one I got.
It's brutal. Kids wouldn't survive that today.
No, they wouldn't, but, it certainly didn't harm me.
Yeah.
No, because Mrs. Legan, now she was a big woman, and she could lay it on you real good, but she left her classroom one time to go do something, and she left me in charge. Well, me and Rex Tomlinson, unfortunately my good friend he's gone now, but Rex and I fixed up some chairs, and the paddle that she kept in a certain drawer, we knew where it was because she'd reach for it. We hid it up in it had one of those drop ceilings, so we hid it up in the ceiling. And only after we graduated did we write an anonymous letter to tell Miss Legan where we had hidden her. Oh, but I enjoyed school, and I got such a quality education.
Yeah.
Math has always been my greatest. Never had any math in college, but I set some kind of state record on the ACT when I took the math part in high school. Yeah. And it's because Mrs. Harris, who was an incredibly smart woman. And in that little town of Broken Bow, she offered, there was a Latin class. I mean, in math, we didn't just have general math. We had algebra, solid algebra, plain algebra. We had calculus in that little town because she was qualified to teach. Now, on the first day of the year, first day of the class, me and Rex, a couple other guys, we were back. We were back there, and of course, about the second day I was talking too much, and she made me sit for the rest of the semester, almost in every class, right beside her desk. Well, Mrs. Harris always explained things on the blackboard. They weren't green boards in those days, they were black. But on the blackboard, she explained things, but she mumbled. And so most of the class could not hear her. But I'm right up, she's right there, because I'm up, my desk is sitting right beside her desk. Yeah. So I learned so much, and that's how I became really good in math.
Yeah.
But just so many classes. I think I got an incredible quality education in that public school in a tiny town of where teachers were making nothing because we had we had a very small tax base to base anything on, but they were dedicated. Believe me, they were called to teaching. None of them were there for a job. It was a calling. And most of them had been there forever. But I shall ever love the teachers that I had for giving me a wonderful. When I came to OU, and there in the broadcasting course, I had a leg up because I was a veteran broadcaster already, and I worked at Channel 5 and did the 6 o'clock news, and so it was not a problem when assignments were given out by the college professors. We'd go field trips. They'd come and watch me work. Yeah. Okay, and KOMA was so cool because there was a guy who became a huge star later on, Conway Twitty. Conway lived in South Oklahoma City. He built homes, and he had a burger stand called Twitty Burgers, okay? Now, that was in between two careers of his. He had a big rock and roll hit in the 1950s called It's Only Make Believe. And this is before then he gets back into country music, and he and Loretta Lynn, and they would do duets. I mean, Conway became a huge, huge country star. But Conway, Conway's gone. He's dead, so I can't defame him. Good guy, but he drank too much, And so he would, and those days, KOMA, I was there with myself all night in this huge building, but I left the front door open. So kids would come through, and they had a big glass for the control room. Well, Conway would come out there and sit with me for 2 hours. I'd have to sometimes say, shh, but no. So I had such an opportunity to meet. Linda Ronstadt wrote me a letter one time. She lived on a ranch way out in Arizona or New Mexico, can't remember. But she had learned to sing by singing along with songs at night on KOMA. It's the only station she could get. So many people, I remember, and in those days, bands would come by to give you a tape of a new song before it was out. Oh, my goodness. I remember these guys showing up one time in Civil War uniforms. It was Gary Puckett and the Union Gap, big-time top 40 in the 60s and early 70s. Well, they came by and then what we would do, the reason that they wanted to give me a tape at night was because the record wouldn't be out for 2 or 3 weeks, but I was able to play it for the western half of the country, and lots of times. I mean, I could. There are 5 or 6 or 7 songs that we had a month before it was actually released as a record. But we had it just as and it was an antiquated time of where you didn't have any electronics because you still had a turntable that you cued the record up, and then you held it with your finger, and when you were ready to go, here's the 5th of 5 in a row on the babbling Bob Burke show, and you let it go. Yeah. That's my broadcast voice. Okay.
Look, doing some research for this interview and looking, there's a lot of stuff that you've done, and we'll get into why that is. But what did little Bob want to do when he grew up? Did you want to be a broadcaster when you grew up?
Well, yes. Yeah. I was always going to replace Walter Cronkite, who did the CBS Evening News during the Watergate, during the assassination of President Kennedy, and no doubt was the most trusted voice in America. Yeah. Okay, so I was going to do that, but then life gets in the way of that. I decide, okay, in fact, I had made as much money because I went with KTOK Radio and the Oklahoma News Network, which was the predecessor was the Indian Nations Network. I was 19, but we drew straws to see who would do the first radio network newscast in Oklahoma, and I got to draw it. Yeah. And so we did that. That turned into the Oklahoma News Network, which still exists. Is 40, 50, 60 stations around the state. Mm-hmm. So I went I even, when I was in the Air National Guard to fulfill my commitment rather than be drafted, I went 6 weeks for basic training, but then the rest of the time I would come to the station at KTOK, which was the most listened to radio station, adult station in town, and in my uniform would do the 5 o'clock big 30-minute newscast, and then with 30 seconds off, then do 15 minutes of news to about 50 stations around the state. Yeah. So I've always, I'm still very conscious of time to the second, because when I broadcast games for ABC, you couldn't be 30 seconds late or you had 400 stations out there, with dead air. So I still have this recurring dream about every 3 or 4 years. I don't remember a lot of my dreams, if I dream. But I have the recurring dream that I literally got caught in the bathroom and I'm a minute late. Now, of getting back, for example, at the Oklahoma News Network, I was the only person in the newsroom at night because I was going to college in the daytime, supposedly, okay? And so I have been 30 seconds late. So the key to that is that you don't get on there and say, I'm sorry I'm late. What you do is you get on there and you start in the middle of a story. So each of these 50 stations out there, they're all thinking, oh, we must have done something wrong. I don't know who taught me that. You know?
So
I've had such a blessed life.
You get into broadcasting.
I'm in my 4th career because I was a broadcaster. Yeah. I sold newspapers before that. Worked at a department store too, That was my job at age 12. I worked in the local department store, at Norris Department Store. But then when David Bourne was elected governor, I never intended to leave Broken Bow. I was going to go back, and my dad was county commissioner. We had a huge insurance agency that I was running with my mom. There was a big discount store that my dad had, so things to do. But then David Bourne decides, and he had been my counselor in my dorm at OU, okay? So I had known him since I was a freshman in college. He's 7 years older. Yeah. And so then David decides to run for governor. I thought, well, okay. So I threw in $200 with 10 other guys, and we hired some polling outfit that said he only had 4% name recognition in the state. Well, it was an incredible campaign, the famous Broom campaign. He becomes governor. And so all of my friends that I work with in the campaign, they decide to go to law school at night at Oklahoma City University.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay. So I come up, and I wasn't necessarily qualified for this, but I was Secretary of Commerce at 27. During times when the economic stimulus package of 1977 was passed in the Carter administration, all at once became like the third or fourth largest state agency. Mm-hmm. We had hundreds of millions of dollars, so I was very popular around the state. I mean, I once said that I had, that we had, and I always gave the governor credit, although one time on the campaign trail in '78, we were in Colgate. Cole County was the poorest county in the state, and so poor counties got more money. So we built a new city hall, a new Department of Human Services building, and a new courthouse in the town. And so we're there at a big high school cafeteria, and so I and a trooper are the only ones accompanying him to do a speech on the campaign trail. He gets out in the car and he says, I don't understand this, but they gave you a larger hand than they gave me. So it's all this stuff, because I'd been down there at the ribbon cuttings for all the things. I always did it in your name, I promise you. But so all at once I had been a broadcaster, and then I'd been a politician, and then I'm going to law school during that time at night, okay? Yeah. And so, and I was in a hurry, so I finished law school in like 2.5 years and became a lawyer. And in fact, I notice here is a biography of a guy named Marion Opala, perhaps our most famous Supreme Court justice. Well, at that time I was in law school, Marion was a judge on the Oklahoma Workers' Compensation Court. Mm-hmm. And so he was the teacher in the workers' comp class. I just took it. I didn't know anything about it. And so loved that he, and as Secretary of Commerce, I was involved because, and Marion helped so much, we were redoing the law in 1978. And so I take this course with Marion, and then he gets me so interested in workers' comp. And by this time, we had written and passed this revolutionary new law that covered every worker in the state. Before that, you had to be in a hazardous occupation. Your job would not be covered if you got hurt on the job, okay? Now, so I thought, hey, I've just written this law. I think I'll practice it. So that's all I've ever done. For 42 years, I have represented injured workers. Yeah. My wife often asks me the question, well, I'm 73. Why are you still working? You don't have to. And I'm very serious about this. We had 7 or 8 years ago a horrible legislative passage of a new law. I had written the laws for 35 years, and then we had some companies they introduced a bill 3 days before the end of a session. It gave Oklahoma the lowest benefits in the country, no question. Now, the legislature since that has recognized the error of their ways and has added some of the benefits back. We still are, we're up to 46th now, okay? But we were last in the country. And until I'm not gonna leave the injured workers of the state hanging, I don't handle a lot of cases myself anymore. We have other lawyers in the firm, or in the building, but I do a lot of mediations because I stay in contact with my friends in workers' comp and the adjusters who I've known forever, and I enjoy those, and I get to be an arbiter, and I'll settle 95% of them. So, so the fourth career, I've really had a fourth career as an author. 39 years ago, when David Bourne was elected to the U.S. Senate, I kind of took over the care of his mother and daddy, who lived up in northwest Oklahoma City. Lyle Bourne, that was the subject of my first biography 150 books ago, was the youngest man ever elected to the U.S. Congress. And I would on Friday afternoon play dominoes with him. And he would tell me these incredible stories about him and Christine getting married. He had never been to Washington when he was elected to Congress. Okay. So they drive to Washington. He shows up at the White House and asks to see the president. Franklin Roosevelt says, "Come on in." Different day.
Different day.
Yeah. He had met Roosevelt because after he had won the Democratic nomination and had no Republican opponent in 1936, he campaigned some for Roosevelt on the back of a train. Remember, we have a wonderful picture of that, the Hall of Fame here. But he's telling me these stories because he and Christine, Lyle and Christine, they got a rooming house, and across the hall was the senator from Missouri, Harry Truman, and his wife Bess. And then down the hallway was Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson. He wasn't even in Congress yet. He was the aide to Congressman Kleberg of Texas. And then other people, Clinton Anderson, who later, and they formed a Monday night poker club, by the way. Yeah. And it's, I always wonder, how do people get on the cabinet of the United States? Well, when Roosevelt dies and Harry Truman becomes president, then Truman says, okay, the Monday night poker club gets one slot on the cabinet. That's fair enough. That's his buddies. So they got one slot. Well, they got together and they thought, well, Clinton Anderson of New Mexico, the senator from New Mexico, is the oldest, so he should get that. So he became the Secretary of Agriculture on the cabinet. That's how that was chosen. But I loved, in fact, I said this ought to be a book. And I teamed up with a law school professor of mine, Von Creel, who I've written a number of books with. And Von and I just wrote that, and I thought, wow, now this is cool. So it became a passion.
Yeah.
At the Oklahoma Heritage Association in those days, that's now the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, there was a guy named Kenny Franks. Unfortunately, we lost him, but Jenny and Paul Emmert and I went to see his widow in the last 3 or 4 months. But Kenny had written a lot of books, and so he kind of taught me, how you should do that, And so here comes other opportunities that came along. And it just became, I don't play golf. Because, shoot, it takes all day to play 18 holes of golf.
That's why I like it.
Yeah. But, hey, I can write half a chapter or a chapter of a book in that time period if you don't have to footnote it, okay? Yeah. But I enjoy that so much because I love Oklahoma very much. I loved my upbringing. And through this, I have met so many, many wonderful great leaders, but also the common people of Oklahoma. I have met so many people. When I do interviews for a book, I might interview former governors and United States senators, but I also interview school teachers who were teaching that person who became, a great leader. And I've always tried to, every 5 books, write a book about somebody that nobody knows about. Yeah. I used to hang out at the Oklahoma Historical Society with some of the historians, and I'd say, okay, I need some book topics. And frankly, that's how wonderful books of a guy named Roscoe Dungy. I'd never heard of him, but he was really the pioneer civil rights leader in Oklahoma. So many other people that they'd say, well, what about Alice? I mean, what about Alice Robertson, our first Congresswoman, and the who was an old maid? I don't think we use that anymore. She was never married, but in Muskogee ran a cafeteria. Was only the second woman ever elected to the U.S. Congress in 1920. Just decides to run for Congress. Wow. Then she introduces a bill to outlaw formula for babies. Needed to be real milk.
That didn't go down too well.
Oh, no, it didn't pass. Okay. Yeah. So I think the lobbyists for Nestle or something. But
right now we are. So as of today, we're at 151.
150
published.
Well, maybe
done.
Published. Yeah. Maybe 149. I have tried to list them all. In fact, recently I'd never had a collection of all of the books.
Yeah.
Okay. And so at various places, at home, at the office, and then various places in my office where I keep extra books.
Yeah.
I found all but 4 of them.
Okay.
But I don't. It's either 149 or 150.
Yeah.
And I years ago I started comparing to other people who had written nonfiction books. Well, Pearl Buck had written 80. Okay. And in all books, I mean, Louis L'Amour wrote 104, and he wrote some of those early at his uncle's because he lived with his uncle out at Choctaw. Yeah. His uncle was a veterinarian out there. And a Lyle Bourne story, but Lyle worked in high school, worked at a block factory, the Let's block factory downtown. Mm-hmm. And so Louis would come in on the train and catch a ride because Lyle had graduated from high school with guys out there, and he'd go take him back, and he remembers the time when Louis was so excited because he had sold a short story for $50, you know. So, and Louis L'Amour, in an interview that I've heard, talks about his early years. His first book was a book of poetry he published during the Great Depression in Oklahoma.
So, how old? So, in the last 30 years, right? You've written 150 books. Yeah.
Well, since I think 1989 was when the Lyle Bourne book. So what is that? 22.
Yeah.
What's 33? It's only 33 years. Yeah.
I was born in 1990, so.
Oh, well, okay.
Sorry.
Well, good. I started writing the year before. And hey, I was already 39 years old.
Yeah.
I had never anticipated writing a book, even though I had a journalism degree.
Yeah.
And had been editor of the high school newspaper. In fact, my job in the Air Force, well, I was editor of the base newspaper.
Yeah.
You know, and had used my journalism degree like that, but never anticipated. I didn't anticipate being a lawyer until all my friends were going to law school at night. You know, so we did. We'd ride together, and you know, unless I was late going around the state awarding some contract for a new sewer plant.
Right.
And then it was so cool because I would fly back into Wiley Post Airport, and then the Highway Patrol, just for fun, would escort me to law school with their sirens on. So I've had more than one professor say, okay, that Burke's coming. You know, and I didn't mean that in disrespect at all, because I tried to learn a lot, you know, somehow passed the bar exam. But I have truly been passionate, not only in Oklahoma, because I've led the fight across the country through a national organization. I'm tired right now from writing a brief in the United States Supreme Court in a big battle over states' rights of where the federal government was trying to take over the workers' comp system in the state of Washington where somebody got hurt on a federal reservation. We want the states to do that. And so I've been involved across the country in lawsuits in those deals. And I never charge for those. I just want to do what's right. I fought this terrible concept that a lot of big companies were trying to thrust upon us about 8 or 9 years ago, called opt-out. So anyway, terrible, worst thing I'd seen for the injured worker in 40 years. And so I not only fought that in Oklahoma, I fought it. I testified before legislatures in 5 other states and beat it because it was just a horrible thing. It was just so we shut that down across the nation and then a New York Times reporter asked me, okay, who's paying you to do this? Insurance company? No. Right. You know, a major corporation started by a guy from Oklahoma that I won't mention, spent about $5 or $6 million in forming an organization with a number of other companies to promote that across the South in conservative legislatures, from South Carolina to Oklahoma. And it was unconstitutional. And so after we won that battle in Oklahoma, but anyway, I spent, I think, $4,200, but out of my pocket, because the reporter really never believed me. No, because if I flew to testify before the legislature in South Carolina, I wouldn't let the people who asked me to come pay my way. Right. I wouldn't let them pay for my hotel. I didn't want anybody to taint my truthfulness and my passion for fighting for the injured worker. And so that's why I'm still at that. Now, I'm known as a moderate. So I love to be a mediator because I will come down in moderation. I'll tell both sides based upon trying. I've represented 17,000 injured workers in 42 years. So I say, look, and I know this judge, here's what he's going to give you. And why don't I get you a couple of thousand more than that? You settle and go on down the road. And that usually works very well. I'm giving away all my secrets, okay? But so I'm in my third and fourth career. I don't practice a lot of law, except as a mediator. But I just wake up in the morning thinking about book projects. Hey, I will email Jenny Campbell at 4:30 in the morning. Of course, she's up too, editing a manuscript. Yeah. But we exchange emails at all hours of the day and night, just because I'll think of something. Yeah. Oh, I forgot to tell you yesterday I talked to so-and-so, whatever. And so I have, if you could see my office, there's a box for every book. There's one of those banker's boxes that is already set up where interviews are going in. Man, there's 4 or 5 of those on my floor. Yeah. And so I got to get with it because there are a lot of stories to tell. And I told my son the other day that I think I'll stop at 200. Yeah. He said, "No, you won't." No, I was going to tell you. He knows you really well. Books. Now, I've not written the most books in the world. They say I've written the most nonfiction books. Yeah. But Nora Roberts writes romance novels. She's now at like 180. Yeah. And she's about my age, so I may never catch her. I one time met her at a book signing somewhere, or I can't remember, some kind of a book event, festival. Yeah. And she said, "Oh, mine are so easy to write because hey, love's the same, you change the place it happens and the names of the character, Yeah. But I enjoy I don't want to ever do a fiction book because truth really is a stranger than fiction. Mm-hmm. And there's so many great stories of Oklahomans to tell. I'm working on a book of about 400 Oklahomans who have changed their worlds, who have made a difference, from inventions to sports heroes to public servants to astronauts. I mean, it's amazing. And again, my goal there is for my daughter, Natalie, and I are working on that. And because she's done a lot of research of the later people. Okay. I'm an expert on the old people, Yeah. But it is just amazing. And it's not just our older people who have excelled in that. Our current generation of kids are getting out of college and 5 years later producing episodes of the FBI, which is my favorite Tuesday night show and we have so many younger people who have gone just from all of the universities in the state, not just the flagship universities, but our regional universities are putting out lots of people who are making a name for themselves. A kid from Stratford, who worked as a cashier at the Walmart store in Ada when he was going to East Central, is the present CEO of Sam's Club. He starts out as a cashier, and Sam Walton comes through and says, you're pretty bright, and it's the early age of the computers, and why don't you come up to Bentonville, because we might have a place for you up there. Yeah. He get out of college and moves to Bentonville. He's the CEO of Sam's Club. That's amazing. We've had a former CEO of Walmart from Oklahoma, and of course Walmart was founded by Sam Walton from Kingfisher, Oklahoma, who married Helen Robson from Claremore, whose brother Frank, who has been very active in the Oklahoma Hall of Fame and the Oklahoma Foundation for Excellence, but her brother's still living. Very, very successful banker in real estate. He did real well, he said, because his brother-in-law kept hassling him to buy stock in Walmart, and so the Claremore Walmart store is store number 3.
Yeah. God, you're very inspiring to a lot of people because you just don't stop. But there's
Oh no, I know it. I mean, I'm so proud of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And I've never charged for writing those books. I don't want to make any. I'm not going to get up at even any more. Getting older, I'm not getting up at 4:30 or 5. Now I might sleep until 5:30. Okay, but I'm not getting up that early to go work. But I'll get up that early to go try to look through some interviews and write a chapter. But I'll never run out of stories. Yeah. I've had breakfast with somebody this week who has an excellent idea for a book that ultimately I will try to sell Jenny, that we ought to do that.
Right.
And if we could ever come with enough paper in this world for the printing houses now, this ought to be a year of 3 or 4 or 5 books, coming out that have been finished during the pandemic. I had a lot of time during the pandemic to write.
Yeah, you said you don't charge charge people. So what happens when the books go on sale? Where does that money go?
Well, it is a great fundraiser for the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. Yeah, to fund all the programs that the Hall of Fame does, and many times, for example. Burns Hargis, the recently retired president of OSU, has asked me to write his biography. And once that's done, half of the books will go to OSU, and Burns has not yet decided, but it'll go to some scholarship fund or part of a chair or something. And we've done that on a number of occasions where the books have been shared with the entity, especially because we've written. Well, I mean, like Jenny and I wrote a history of the State Fair, and the State Fair got a lot of those books, and a lot of those they gave away, but a lot they sold at the State Fair. So, but I don't. It's my part of giving back to Oklahoma. Oklahoma has given me the most wonderful life from birth, from the first time, and I remember back to age 3. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful travel. And so I want to give back by preserving those stories. Anytime I can preserve one of these neat stories, I'm a very happy camper.
I'm fascinated because you've written books on...
I'm so windy.
No, you're good.
And see, I could tell you about all those 400 people.
Well, that's the thing is you have done books. Basically, you do what I do. I mean, I do what you do basically, but I do it for an hour, not in 150, 200, however many pages book. So that's why I'm fascinated with, obviously we share a mutual passion for sharing people's stories and the state of Oklahoma. What I'm getting to is, tell me about that time in 06 or 05 when you got the phone call that, had you been working with the Hall of Fame before you were inducted? And how did you feel then when you got that phone call to say, hey, now this is your turn. Now somebody should be writing books about you.
About that, yes, okay.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
Are you ready? Or
we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before I was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2006, I had worked with the Heritage Association and the Hall of Fame that became the Hall of Fame since probably 1987 or 88, 89, first having published several books and then serving on the board forever. I mean, I was on the board just forever and was shocked out of my gourd because I didn't anticipate that. I was in my mid-50s, but then I get a call from Lee Allen Smith, my dear friend that I'm not sure, probably before that or after that, I had written his biography. Yeah. and so I was just saying, what? Me? I thought he was calling because I had nominated people for the Hall of Fame in the past and probably did that year. And I thought that maybe he was calling me to say, hey, whoever you nominated got in. So I was so honored. Because it truly is the greatest honor an Oklahoman can receive. And so, and one of my heroes in life, I got to be inducted with him that night, posthumously Woody Guthrie. And so I sat by Woody Guthrie's sister. And, Woody Guthrie, of course, wrote This Land is Your Land, that is one of the most sung songs in history.
Yeah.
But so I was very honored. I was inducted with two really good friends of mine, Glenn Johnson, who at the time was the Chancellor of Higher Education in Oklahoma, and at the time the President of Oklahoma City University, Tom McDaniel. And so those were good friends of mine through civic projects, because I've been on the boards of a lot of nonprofits, okay, for a long time. And so I knew those guys, and I even wrote a biography of Glenn Johnson's daddy, who was an early congressman in Oklahoma. Yeah. And so I was so honored, and a guy that I'd never met before or since, that's in my book of 400, is a guy named Philip Kistler. From Boston. Well, he's from Tulsa, but he basically customized the MRI and at Massachusetts General Hospital to be a diagnostic tool in strokes and heart attacks. In fact, the stroke center at the Massachusetts General Hospital is named for him. So, and he was on the ground floor of developing the MRI as a diagnostic tool. And we've had so many people like that. Another guy from Tulsa did the first human gene transplant in history. You know, so many things we have, Oklahomans have done. No state can claim the aura of having excelled in almost every part of life.
Yeah. Who introduced you that night at the Hall of Fame?
I think Governor George and I.
Yeah?
Yeah. Well, I know that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had written George's biography in 2000. Mm-hmm. And I knew him before that. I mean, he had been lieutenant governor when I was Secretary of Commerce. Yeah. So I knew him. He was from McAllister. In fact, I'm having lunch with him on Monday. Great. George will be 94 in June. And still moving along.
Still with it. He's still with it. We had a great conversation with him. He's still with it. He told us some fantastic stories, which people listening to the podcast will have heard those, because that would have gone out before this one. But looking over all the things you've done in the last 78 years, what are the things that you haven't done yet that are on your list? Like what Because you clearly don't strike me as someone who's stopping anytime soon.
No.
You know?
Hey, as long as the good Lord gives me health enough to get to the office and get up the stairs to my little area where I write and can wade through the boxes of things, what I want to do is just do another 30 or 40 books. Yeah. Because I have on my computer, I have a list of 22 that need to start tomorrow. I can't.
What is the pro? You said you handwrite everything. Tell me about the process of interviewing people.
I'm the fastest typist in Midtown. Okay, because in high school, again, that great education. Sybil Webb was this wonderful little lady who taught us typing in high school. Everybody hated it. Well, I loved it. I even typed my finals in law school. Okay, and hadn't written so many books on. With Word, I use the Word program, but I started out on an ancient Franklin computer. But I can out-type anybody, honestly, in any office within 100 yards of and there's a lot of lawyers and a lot of legal secretaries. But I type all the time. Yeah. I just love doing that. I can sit there. The only time I really get fatigued is like on a Saturday, and I'm really trying to finish something, and I might do it for 12 hours, and bathroom breaks are it. And maybe, take a sandwich with me or something. Yeah. And I get what I call anointed. I mean, I am in the groove, and I am sitting there writing, and the time goes away from me. It's wonderful. A lot better than slicing a ball over into the water. I was famous for losing balls when I did play a little golf. Yeah. But hey, the worst that can happen to me on this is if I forget to save it and there's an electrical impulse that I have to rewrite 2 paragraphs,
Right. There's a great lesson there that you kind of found your passion at 39 years old.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a lot of people out there who, people who I went to college with or people in their late 20s or whatever it is, that my age that even when you graduate, right? People ask you, well, what are you going to do? Or as a young person, you kind of have that worry. You might feel that outside pressure from a parent or family. What are you going to do with your life? And you're like, I have no idea what I'm going to do in my life.
Well, I believe I was very successful as a lawyer, and did that. But when I spent the time with Lyle and with Vaughn and putting together his biography, that became my passion. Yeah. Before that, it was probably church league softball. Because whatever church I went to in my 20s and 30s, I was always the coach.
Yeah.
And loved to play church league softball. But then at about 39, I looked around one night and thought, I'm the oldest person here.
Yeah.
I could still hit and I could pitch, but my legs were gone. I couldn't run. So I hung it up that night. Yeah. Never played another game.
One of the things I found in the research is kind of your rule of thirds, right? Tell us about that. Yeah, that's a great story.
Well, what I like, we have 6 wonderful kids and 10 wonderful grandchildren.
Yeah.
And so I try to spend a third of my time practicing law, a third of my time writing books. Okay. A third of my time doing nonprofit work or doing charitable work, things like that, okay? And then a third of my time with the grandkids.
Yeah.
Now, you might notice that there are 4/3 there, but my theory has always been life is a series of 15-minute segments.
Yeah.
Some of my kids think, well, I only have 2 hours. I can't do that. Well, if I got 2 extra hours, I can do 8 15-minute projects. There's always a project, whether it is a housewife and mom at home. If there's 15 minutes, there's a 15-minute project. And in my office, there's always a 15-minute project.
Yeah. It's probably a hard question, but which book or books are you most proud of?
Oh, I can never figure that out.
Or stories that, the people that you grew up thinking, those people are great. Like, I hope I get to meet those people one day, and then you end up writing their biography.
Well, one of my really early, really good selling books was still popular. I'm giving a talk to the Oklahoma Pilots Association about the guy next month. Is Wiley Post.
Yeah.
Wiley was... it's an incredible rehab story. Wiley had only one eye. He had the other blown out in an industrial accident the first day on the job, and then had only a 6th grade education, and had served some time in prison for robbery. So who would hire that kind of a guy to be a pilot? Yet within 7 years after he is paroled, I forgot to say, he had a depression problem so bad that the governor paroled him from prison. They let him out. The prison doctor recommended it.
Yeah.
So with all those problems, 7 years later, he becomes the world's greatest pilot because he is the first person in the world to fly around the world alone, 1933. And then the following year, he discovers the jet stream over Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Then, of course, in 35, that's when he and Oklahoma's most famous person of all time, Will Rogers, died on the frozen ice of Point Barrow, Alaska.
Yeah.
But, that, and another book that I think was needed is a book called Simple Truths that is the only book about the bombing investigation that ever sold at the memorial, because I teamed up with the two FBI agents who led the investigation, which at the time was the largest criminal investigation in history. Now, the January 6th attack on the Capitol, that investigation, because they've gone over the country, has probably surpassed that now, with the most man-hours with the FBI and other agents. A fascinating story of how things came together within just hours of where the FBI learns about Tim McVeigh and they learn about Terry Nichols. When I took on that project, I was very open with the Department of Justice in saying, look, I'm a lawyer and I'm going to make up my own mind. And they gave me, during the Terry Nichols trial, 30,000 copies of 30,000 exhibits that had been used in the federal trial in Denver. And so I took those and, hey, I can say without a glimmer of doubt that Tim McVeigh and Terry Nichols alone, those two guys, former soldiers with short haircuts, with no ties to any foreign organization, literally hated their country, and they did that atrocious deed.
Yeah.
But those two stand out, although it's my favorite book is usually the one that just got published.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so that's my favorite book for a while.
I get the sense, I mean, it's great to hear that, like, you still get the kind of fizz of writing a new book, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And interviews are wonderful.
Yeah.
Because I've been doing a lot of interviews of Hal Smith, Oklahoma's most famous restaurateur of all time, kid who grew up in Ardmore.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting story that you'll read in the book about, for example, how the names of some of his restaurants were. The Upper Crust is named that because his mother told him they didn't have a lot of money in Ardmore, and she said, "Now you need to go to school so you can mingle with the upper crust out at the country club."
That is brilliant.
Well, when he wanted to make the Upper Crust more than just a pizza place, with wine and other things, call it the Upper Crust.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then one of the funniest stories is Louis, very successful all over in several states. Louis is actually named after OU coach Bob Stoops' dog, because Coach Stoops and Hal went to Manhattan, Kansas, where Bob had been on the staff of Coach Bill Snyder, and he just loved this little bar and grill.
Yeah.
And Hal didn't think that you could make that, so they go up there, and Hal talks to the owner, and they come back and they establish Louis. They needed a name, and Coach had an old dog named Louis. So that's where Louis got his name.
That's the great part about doing the interviews and finding out these stories and the backstories. And I get the same sense of feeling that from doing a podcast. You hear stories you never would have heard before.
Oh, no. And the backstories are so wonderful.
Yeah.
And I want to preserve those. So it's always exciting when I do an interview of people who. Now, many times I have a co-author. I don't in Hal Smith's. But like in Burns Hargis, I have a co-author, Gary Shute, who was director of communication at OSU for a long time, so he knows the inside story of all those years at OSU. And so they do many of the interviews. Yeah. And then I have them transcribed, and then once those are in writing, I start tearing them apart and putting them in decades. And once there's a box full of material, I put it in decades.
Gotcha.
And then I start writing the story of the person's childhood. Yeah. And then just move on. It doesn't overwhelm me because I only have one folder on my desk.
Right.
And then sometimes I have to leave blanks in those first, because I didn't get the right spelling of a town, or I leave blanks.
Yeah.
But then you just do it chronologically. If you're doing a subject book like a history of the state fair, Jenny and I divided up everything by early years. Mm-hmm. And then toward the end, food. I wanted a chapter on food because that's my favorite part of the fair.
Yeah. Do you talk about? You mentioned interviews. Do you send everybody the same set of questions just to?
No. I do the interviews many times in person.
Okay.
Or I do a lot of them on phone anymore, especially out of state people.
Yeah.
But I just record the conversation. No. It's just, for example, in a Hal Smith interview, which is my current project.
Yeah.
I will call, for example, I got to interview the guy who founded Outback, because he and Hal then built them all over this part of the country. Mm-hmm. Well, he's retired in Florida, and he had never been to Australia. He just came up with the idea.
He has his own golf course in Florida. I have a friend who's played it, and he said that you can literally have anything. You can have something that's meat on every single tee box.
Oh, no, I'm right. Yeah, so I catch him on there, and he's 75 years old. Yeah. But I know a little about him because Hal has mentioned him, and I knew he had founded Outback. Mm-hmm. And so, but usually my first question is, okay, tell me what's your full name? Spell that for me, okay? Yeah. And then I'll say, hey, when's the first time you ever met Hal Smith? Well, that starts a 30-minute conversation. Gotcha. Well, we both worked for Steak and Ale, and then as he's saying things, then that prompts other questions.
Yeah.
Well, now, what year was that? And was Norm Brinker the head of Steak and Ale at the time? I mean, it's like, and I think my legal training has helped me there because I'm searching for information. Mm-hmm. And as he's talking, I'm interrupting with questions. And so I get all that information by the end of the 30 minutes.
Yeah. I'm going to have a lot more conversations with you because I got so much to learn. I mean, we're 400 and something episodes into the podcast, but still, like, there's always learning and there's always intricacies of conversation.
Oh, yeah,
just ways to keep it going. But
and I'm still learning.
Yeah.
I love co-authors. We have a biography coming out of a federal judge another federal judge was my co-author.
Yeah.
Well, what a great co-author, because he would correct whole paragraphs saying, let's say it a different way. I loved that because he had been this judge's friend for 50 years.
Yeah.
And so I'm never offended by somebody saying, why not do it this way? Yeah. And Jenny Campbell, I'm telling you, is the world's best editor. Now, I bet she's done 60 or 70 books.
Yeah.
So I've learned from her little idiosyncrasies in editing. Mm-hmm. You can't say U.S. Senator, you got to say United States Senator. Okay, I know how she uses dashes, and so I try to make it as clean as I can before she ever edits it because I know her rules. Okay.
You've had that return edit with all the red marks over it, as I have as well.
Oh no, yeah, but hey, no, that's no problem.
No, I totally
love
agree
to get
with you.
those, and I'll stay up late that night of making all the corrections, and then send it back to her, and then it is ready for design.
Yes.
It is ready to go.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in and sharing some stories.
It's my pleasure.
These are brilliant. You're very inspiring. Like I said, road to 200. We're on the way to 200 books.
That's right. But if Nora Roberts slows down, I'm gonna try to outrun her.
Yeah. Well, I don't know this, but I don't know what does one book actually classify as? Does it have to be certain many pages?
Well,
I mean, there's ways to get around.
There really is within
there.
The industry. It's got to be more than 40 pages for it to be a book. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a pamphlet. Gotcha. I don't know where I got that information from, but I've always quoted that. Right.
Just good for context for people listening. But Ms. Burke, thank you so much for coming in. It's a pleasure.
Great, Mike.
Great stories. Just so many things in there that people listening can take. You're 78 years old. You're still kicking. You're not going anywhere anytime soon. You're still passionate.
That's right.
Find your passion, no matter how long it takes you to find it. And once
anybody driving on 13th Street in Oklahoma City will see my light burning very early in the morning.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. Go and enjoy your grandson's birthday party. Happy 12th birthday. And for everyone listening, we'll catch you next episode. Cheers.
Thank you.
This podcast is presented by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, telling Oklahoma stories through its people since 1927. Follow them online at oklahomahof.com and definitely on Instagram at oklahomahof.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.